finding people who share the same mission.
Yes.
You know, they don't have to be as good right away, but if they care and if they're passionate, they're going to get pretty good pretty fast.
Yeah.
But it's much harder to teach somebody who's really knowledgeable to how to engage and teach than it is finding that person who's willing to teach and engage and helping them, with the knowledge.
Welcome to the Dr. J.J. Thomas Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Dr. J.J. Thomas Podcast. We have a special treat for you today. Today we're hosting, it's not the first ever Philadelphia baseball clinic, but it's the first ever at our office here at Primal Physical Therapy in Bryn Mawr. And we have some really special guests. We have Jack Ferrick, Ray Ricker, and Travis Turgeon. We're going to tell you all about them, but if you're a baseball fan, you're going to want to make sure you tune into this whole episode. If you're not a baseball fan, you still should tune in because we're going to give a lot of great advice on everything from mindset to the importance of staying injury-free to the importance of high-level leadership and coaching. So whether you're a baseball player or not, or whether you're a baseball coach or not, make sure you tune in and subscribe so you don't miss other options as well. Let's get started. Thanks for coming, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, this is the first time I've had 3 people on. So I'm really excited. I should have had like a talking stick maybe, so we didn't get confused. But I'd love to start. Really, I think we should start just with brief introductions, if you don't mind. Everybody, you each bring your own individual but unique, but special elements to the Philadelphia Baseball Clinic, I believe. And so let's kind of give a brief background of each of your roles, if you don't mind, when you're not teaching.
So I'm Jack Ferrick, and I'm from Virginia. And so I've been running a catching academy called Catchers U. I've been doing that since 2012. And basically from that time, we've worked with 8-year-olds to, all the way through professional athletes, kind of really focusing on the total buildup. And we've kind of just used catching, baseball, and softball as our vehicle to help kids maximize their potential and hopefully make them just a little bit better than when they showed up.
Yeah, I love that. When Jack and I were talking before we started today, we were talking about, how to really make changes in the efficiency of a sport like baseball and catching. And I love Jack mentioned how, he's, of course, worked with guys of all levels, including up to the pros, but how part of what you love with the youth population is that you can really kind of mold them into great technique and response from an early age so that they do better long term.
Yeah, the whole goal being just to help kids learn how to problem solve for themselves.
Yeah.
Be able to provide them the structure and the guidance, but then at the same time, be able to not have to be there. Yeah. And it's almost like our whole goal for this is so that they start out maybe needing us more than they should.
Yeah.
Building them to the point where they kind of need us, but they don't want us.
Yeah.
And then to the end where they've been able to kind of do it and figure it out on their own, and then they kind of just use us to check back in.
It's awesome. Love it. Ray, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, Ray Ricker. I was college coach for 15 years, coached in the NECBL, the Cape Cod League, some of the best summer leagues in all the world. And then 2020 was hired by the Philadelphia Phillies, so I've been player development for since then with the Phillies down
cool.
Kind of in Clearwater and AA, kind of just all over the place.
So I'm really excited to get your perspective on exactly that, player development, and for you guys listening, really help them take advantage of the things that if they want to create a high level player, whether they're a coach or a parent, things that they can focus on. Thank you for coming. Travis?
Yeah, I'm Travis Turgeon. I'm a local high school coach here. I've actually taught kindergarten through college, and I've coached D1, D2, D3 in high school. So I have a pretty big scope and range as far as kids learning and their baseball development. Hopefully with this event, we can do some more networking. That's kind of my big thing, is bringing people together for learning. Even in this group, like Jack, I've known him for 15 years. I coached with Ray in 2011. And just in those 13 years, we've kind of been in contact over the phone. I actually haven't seen Jack in almost a decade.
Love it.
But I never would have realized it because we're always in contact,
Yeah.
picking each other's brain. That's kind of what this event is, just to bring coaches together and learn from each other. If you can pull one thing. And what's nice about the event, too, is we talked about player development. You have a physical therapist, you have a strength coach, so you kind of have a well-rounded kind kind of spectrum of people here talking about baseball.
That's right. I love, and so again, we just gave brief introductions into who they are kind of on paper, right? But what I can tell you from, I've known Travis a couple years, or over a couple years, but these guys I'm just meeting. But in all of them, the common ground is that you all have an extreme passion for the sport. And I think we were talking about this before too. In anything, if you want excellence, it has to be driven by passion and mission. And so you guys are going to offer so much today into this clinic. And here for those listening as well. So when did you start? Let's talk about that. When did you guys start the Philadelphia Baseball Clinic?
Go ahead.
Yeah, we kind of just had the idea. I was kind of inspired by the Texas Baseball Ranch in Houston, where I went down. It was held in a barn. It was a really grassroots kind of thing and built up. There's a bunch of stuff available as far as like big conventions, but I feel like in a more intimate setting, you get more out of it.
Yeah.
And that was the plan for it, is just to, let's call our friends that coach that have a similar passion, get them together, and see where it grows. In year 2, it's grown a little bit.
This is only year 2.
Yeah.
Wow, this is awesome.
Yeah. No, we're really happy with how it's kind of grown organically, and that was the thing. When Travis came with me to with the idea, it's always the start that stops most people. So it's like just getting the push to get it going, and it was like, all right, we're gonna do it. Let's go all in. And year 1 was good, and happy with the outpouring of support for year 2.
Yeah, and it is. It's like, it's support, but it's also people just realizing that it's something that they can take advantage of, and it's going to only bring their team better, right?
Yeah.
So with that, let's talk a little bit about the lineup, right? Like we have a whole guest of speakers. I know our Dr. Eric Abramowitz is speaking on some things. What are you guys? What are you speaking on?
I'll be talking about catchers and throwing today, kind of doing a breakdown of how to help your catchers maybe maximize throwing, mostly focusing on using their lower half, kind of some of the stuff we were talking about earlier about getting the core and then the feet involved and stuff like that.
Yeah, lower half of the body in terms of throwing.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just read some stat that was like 50 to 60% of the force of throwing comes from the lower half.
Yeah, and I think most kids probably put 90 to 95% into thinking about their arm.
That's right.
So,
and that's why we see so many injuries, right?
There's a lot of reasons, but
I know.
That doesn't help for sure.
That's a huge part, exactly. I think that's right. And what about you, Ray? What are you speaking at this or just supporting?
Spoke last year,
okay,
just
great.
trying to help facilitate it. We have got a great lineup of people speaking, so kind of turning it over and let Travis and I kind of just work on the logistics.
Yeah, I know Eric. I mean, I'll speak for Eric. I know Eric's is doing a talk on his. I think his title is like the best ability is availability.
Yeah.
And I love that because, to his point, if you want to have a player be very able and excel in a sport, they have to be available. And so, how do we keep these players on the field, right? What's one of the things, Ray, that I would love to ask you about, like in your player development, is there a tier of importance of things that you look for in nourishing their excellence? Yeah,
so I like to, I've got a 5-year-old, so I do a lot of my tinkering with him as well. So it's just letting them not coach the athlete out of the player and letting the athlete just kind of be free and not queuing them up to putting them into these static positions and kind of like just having them paint by number, letting them kind of freestyle and go out and, just keep building the athlete as much as you can, just because no matter what sport it is, like everybody always wants the best athlete. So if you just have them stay stagnant in one sport and just in one kind of movement pattern, I think it's going to lead to a lot more injuries. I think it's going to lead to a lot of staleness in just how that player really enjoys the game. So I think it's just sending a really good foundation and letting the kid fall in love with the game rather than just like drilling the same thing over and over into him.
I love that. I saw when I was reading up on you guys, I saw something, quote that you had. It was like, I'm going to butcher it, but essentially the gist of it was like, the game is stressful enough. Mm-hmm. Like I don't want to stress these players out. And you didn't say this in those words in what I read, but you just said it there. Like I want to cultivate the love of it, and I think that's so smart.
Yeah, I mean these players are going to put the most like stress on themselves, like that we can't even think that the internal stresses they're putting on, that the external of us, like they don't need it, and
Yeah.
like let them play free. They're gonna make mistakes, but how quickly they can adapt and adjust from that, I think that's huge. And like Jack alluded to, is like being elite problem solvers. Like
Yes.
you've got to be your own best coach. You've got to go out and work on your own development, because at the end of the day, it's just you. It's you battling against yourself.
Right. And that is so valuable. Like being able to analyze yourself in a way. Also, I'll just say, with you setting the foundation for player development of them maintaining the love of the sport, that they'll have more clarity when they're analyzing themselves, right? So, because if you're under a high stress situation, whether you're in PT, whether you're in baseball, whether you're in a podcast, if you're in a high stress situation, you're gonna have a higher chance of sort of cracking under pressure and not even be able to have clarity of vision of what you're trying to do, right?
Yeah.
So that's smart.
And I think it all goes together too, because then us as coaches, we have to communicate with the athlete, because they all they have their own PT, they have their own hitting coach, they have their
Yes.
own catching coach. So us being the pit crew for them and coming together, working collaborative, like we all have to be on the same page if the athlete is ultimately the end user.
So I love that, Eric. I got a glimpse at Eric's talk, and I spoke with you before the show, and you just mentioned all three of you at some point have given like a car analogy, and I love that, because also Eric in his talk, you'll see later, he kind of makes the analogy of an athlete as a race car. And it's exactly, you have your pit crew, you have your engine, you have your, different cars are going to perform differently just by the nature of the type of car, right? And so giving the best outcome is often going to probably depend on all of those factors.
Yeah, no, and I think that one of the reasons why I'm drawn to this sport, I was fortunate to play multiple sports growing up, but I think the reason why I became an adult and the reason why I put time and effort into baseball, softball, is I love failure.
Yes.
Because failure allows you to grow. And so, like, I have an 8-year-old, and I want my kids, I have an 8-year-old son and an 11-year-old daughter, and I love that they play sports because I want them to fail. And I want them then to have to learn from that failure and then figure out a little bit about themselves, right? And I think the thing when you start, and the reason why, like, my coaching circle, my buddies, the people I call, it's a small group, because the number one thing that I always make sure that when I'm putting time and effort into friendships or relationships is I want to make sure the common goal is people wanting to help kids, or people wanting to, just better other people. And I think when you start doing that and you start being, you start giving everything, you don't hide anything, that allows kids to not just be in a space mentally where failure can then be seen as growth, because the fear of failure is the number one thing that you're going to fight against. And that's why a lot of kids will, or just players in general, will stay with whatever's safest. But when the players who are able to go outside that and hold themselves accountable, but not criticize themselves,
Yes.
those are the ones that really can grow, because failure doesn't become a talent evaluation. It becomes just, okay, I failed.
Yeah.
This is why. Let's fix it.
It's a data point.
Correct.
Like, it's a data point rather than a judgment. Exactly. Yeah, I think there's so much to unwrap there. I just blanked on my thoughts, though.
Well, just to piggyback off Jack, we have Scott Oberg. He played with the Rockies, works from, his talk today is going to touch on that. It's really not pitching specific in his journey at the bigs. It's more, he dealt with a lot of injuries, and it's how you overcome that adversity all the way up to the bigs, and the ability to have to adjust and be resilient to become a big leaguer. Obviously, talent's a piece, but Scott's going to touch on that today, of just
That's
the
awesome.
resiliency piece.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was alluding to in the intro. Like, I think mindset, you just said it too. I think mindset is so much of every success in life, whether it's baseball or running a clinic or opening, another clinic, right? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really
I
cool.
think of you and Jack as similar realms with your businesses. And
Yeah, I think so too. I was thinking, actually, because we were talking earlier, like on that note, you and I were talking before the episode about how, how kind of our decision-making process into who and how we hire. And what you just said about, the most important thing is that they're passionate and that their sort of intentions are pure. Right? Because you can teach skill.
Right.
And this is true whether it's a pitcher or a catcher or another athlete, or if it's a physical therapist or a business owner. It's like you can teach skill, but you can't teach passion and integrity.
Right. And then just the willingness to want to engage.
Yeah.
And to put others first. And I think that's why I also love the catching position, because that's a servant leadership position, because you are tied, to so many things during the game. But and as you know, as a former catcher,
I don't know if you know I was a former catcher, and up through high school, and then
But it's like one of those things, right, where you're always tied to your team or you're tied to a pitcher, and I think that allowing yourself to find, like we were talking about, like when you're hiring and stuff, is finding people who share the same mission.
Yes.
They don't have to be as good right away, but if they care and if they're passionate, they're going to get pretty good pretty fast.
Yeah.
But it's much harder to teach somebody who's really knowledgeable to how to engage and teach than it is finding that person who's willing to teach and engage and helping them, with the knowledge.
Yeah, and to tie that back to the failure piece, like if they have the drive to succeed and to really, like you said, it really comes down to serving others, then they're going to allow themselves to be vulnerable enough to fail so they can learn, so they can grow better and then gain confidence, right? It's like this big cycle. It's really cool. Yeah. Tell me more about can you guys tell me about the summer league stuff? Because I find that fascinating, but I'm not being a full baseball world person. I sometimes am like, unsure of the details.
Yeah, no, college summer league essentially is like basically a tryout for the scouts. It's essentially a minor league, low-level minor league setting where they play with wood bats, they play every day, and it teaches them how to be a big leaguer. And, there's a lot of failure that goes on. I know we keep going back to that, but how kids deal with failure for the first time.
Yeah.
You're playing against the best of the best, and it's something maybe some of these kids aren't used to for the first time. Our coach up there always tells a story of one big leaguer that hit 138, so he's going to hit like about 1 every 10 at bats, and he's a 10-year big league career out of that. Because again, it knocks you down, but how you build yourself up. There's a lot of pressure with the scouts, and like Ray talked about, Ray coached in the league probably 5, 6, 7 years before, right? And the league's changed a little bit, but it was basically, it's a way for scouts to see kids in a big league setting.
Yeah.
Unlike college, or it's the closest thing they'll see to the big leagues until they get there.
That's cool.
Yeah. They all live with host families. They're from all over the country, so they're getting used to bus rides, different towns, different areas. So it's just different stressors.
That's cool. And it's how long? How long does it last?
3 months.
Yeah, June to early August. Then they go back to their respective schools and start it up all over again.
Awesome.
Yeah, I played and coached, and I still talk to kids I played with. It's fun. It's baseball the whole summer, no school, no worries, and it's a great time of your life. I wish I could go back.
Yeah, well, you do go back, right? You wish you could be there for 3 months.
Yeah.
Tell me about player development with the Phillies. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so it's a year-round ordeal. So they're constantly going. It's their job. There's only 165 players you're allowed in every single organization domestically, from rookie ball to AAA. And the big leagues is obviously its own separate entity. And I mean, from PT, strength, mental performance, dietitian, just runs the full gambit of everything, and just trying to nudge players to get them a little bit better and hopefully create some assets for our big league team. So
that's awesome. And so your role in that, do you find you're helping navigate, like, helping these guys, first of all, maybe recognize, here's a question. Here's how I want to say this question. I think I see this with my own athletes. There's a line between recognizing a need for improvement, but also allowing yourself to struggle through a deficit a little bit, right? And so I find a lot of my athletes, whether they're patients of mine or my own kids, sometimes deciding when to recognize a deficit should be channeled to another leader is tough, because there's this mental aspect of like, you know what, my knee hurts. It's problem solving again. It's like, you know what, I feel a little something in my knee. Is it something that I should try to push through? Is it something that I should go see JJ or Chelsea or Eric for? Yeah, so do you find there's a role in that for you in helping these guys figure out when and how to utilize the resources they have for them?
Yeah, so every department has their own unique sort of player action plan for each person. So on the day-to-day basis, like if your knee hurts, like it's just a collaborative effort, just talking with strength, hey, talking with PT, like, hey, Ray's knee's a little banged up today, like let's take a little look at it, or hey, maybe we don't do so much blocking with him today in the bullpen, or hey, maybe we'll monitor it, just try to keep the players overall player goal kind of moving them forward and keeping them on the field rather than off the field.
And then with Catchers U, with the problem solving approach that you try to instill in them, how do you teach them that? Like what? And that's a very broad question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I think the biggest thing is we cultivate communication.
Yeah.
So the first thing is like being able to respond. And so we'll ask a lot of yes or no questions. So they actually have to answer. They can't just bob their head one way or the other.
That's great.
So like the process, so like my son who's 8, knowledge hasn't had a chance to build yet. So we'll guide them a lot, but then we'll ask questions. Like we don't just say, do you understand? We'll be like, what about this do you understand?
Yeah.
And then because what we've learned or what I've seen since I've been coaching is if you teach them why they're doing what they're doing, then it's a lot easier to figure out what they're doing. But the real goal is then teaching them to know when to do it. And I think, if you can go why to what to when, you'll see huge just maturation in that, and that ability to communicate when they have a concept, they're not as nervous because it's like, I don't know how you guys were. I wasn't the best in school, but if we were reading out loud in like third grade.
Jack, you went to the Naval Academy.
I know.
I didn't read much, but but when so like you're in class and you're like everyone's reading a paragraph and like those kids that are looking and trying to count when they're gonna go and they're like reading their paragraph like 6 down, like they're okay. I'm gonna say it this.
I'm gonna practice this.
I'm gonna practice. Versus the kids that are very confident in their reading ability, right? And they just go, okay, cool, it doesn't matter, right? They can read. So it's getting them the knowledge. And then like one thing like we try with like our 13 to 14, because we try to get them to communicate with like their teammates or whatever. In the beginning, it's like all the kids really think that communication is like come with me, like the yelling leadership, like montage. But it's like, dude, just shoot your pitcher a text message and be like, hey man, what's your favorite pitch? Like, what do you like throwing? Like, why do you like your curveball? Like, why, I said, just ask questions. And then that way you have answers so that when something happens, then you have information.
Yeah.
And then hopefully by the time they're seniors in high school, that they have enough of a concept to be confident.
But also, that's brilliant. What you're also teaching these catchers is way beyond just like the knowledge skill. It's the leadership skill. It's you're teaching them, and this is perfect because this is, as you know, this podcast is for patients and athletes who want to learn how to stay healthy, get healthy, perform better, but it's also for clinicians who want to help their athletes do those things. And one of the things we're stressing often with our clinicians in our mentorship program and our courses is the leadership component, and most importantly, building rapport with your patients. And you just very eloquently gave your catchers a tool to build the rapport with their pitcher so that they can almost read their mind, right?
Or at least they have the confidence to try.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of times that and Ray can speak to this way better than I can, but one of the harder things from a professional baseball standpoint are young catchers when they get drafted. You have an 18, 19-year-old kid drafted out of high school, and now they're having to communicate with 28, 30-year-olds, people who have families, and this kid hasn't.
And they're trying to lead.
His mom was doing his laundry 2 weeks ago, and now he's in a leadership role. And I know that's one of the big, it's probably one of the harder pieces besides the baseball aspect.
Yeah, dealing with that relationship piece, I mean, it's huge because not only is it you're an 18-year-old kid, you could be an 18-year-old kid from the Dominican Republic, you could be from Venezuela, you're talking to this kid from Iowa or trying to communicate with this kid from Iowa. And it's just relationship building, and how do you build that relationship constantly over and over again? I mean, it's just going to take a lot of work and a lot of time and effort, and knowing that you care and like, hey, this is why I called the pitch. And these guys compete. The pitchers compete in pro baseball once every 5 days, once every 7 days. It's like that start for them matters. So you get to play every day. These guys play once a week, so we've got to be really invested in what fingers we're putting down, calling those pitches, because that's how they're going to eat. That's how they support their family.
Yeah.
So just building those relationships. And how do you do it? Every person's different. Every person comes from a different background. So how do we learn the learner and figure out where that person's coming from and what makes that person tick? There's some pitchers we can kick in the butt, and there's some that we have to pat on the back. So we've just got to figure out what's what and who's who.
That's
and go
awesome.
from there.
Yeah,
yes.
PTs have to do that as well. Like,
Yeah, but and so in all relationships,
Yeah.
right? It's like when if that catcher, makes a call and the pitcher, it's like they've earned that relationship a little bit more if they've done the little things along the way where that pitcher knows. It goes back to intention.
Yeah.
Like that pitcher knows that catcher is vested and they're serving that pitcher. It's like their intentions are to serve the bigger mission.
Yeah, you're the only position that everybody's looking at on the field. You're wearing gear, so it automatically makes you different, special. So
Yeah.
if you're not doing those things that, exude leadership, then people are going to be like, I don't really trust that guy. And if the pitcher doesn't trust what you're calling,
Yeah.
it's not going to work out too well.
That brings a question to mind for me. Like, how about 100%? That makes sense. The catchers need that. I would imagine that's true for all positions, though. Really, for the top teams that not. Obviously, the catcher and the pitcher have a huge leadership role, but I would imagine for it to really work in synchrony, it would be helpful if all the players have some sort of way where they're, earning their relationship. Also, yeah. Do you find that?
Yeah. I obviously though, pitching, catching is and biased because I'm a catching guy as well. So
Yeah.
it's that's the one spot you have to be engaged in every single pitch, where in basketball you can be LeBron and just run around with the basketball and
Yeah.
you have the game in your hand. Baseball, you're never really going to know who's going to be that guy, when the ball is going to be hit to you, but catching, you're going to
Every
get a
time.
projectile thrown at you every single time.
Kind of going
Yeah.
on that too. Like I know one of the big reasons why me and Travis hit it off when we first met is his dad was a coach for a long time. My dad was a coach for a long time, and I always laugh at the more research we do and the more new school we get, the more old school lessons stay true. And kind of just thinking about this, one thing that my dad always would say to me, and it didn't really make sense until I started coaching. It was look, man, everyone's always trying to be on the right page. And you can try to be on the right page, but it don't really matter if you're on the wrong page, as long as your guys are all on the same page.
Yeah.
And I think that fearlessness that you're trying to instill in your leaders, of hey, you're going to make mistakes. And I think there's a lot of people who, because they don't show their intentions, or maybe they're not investing as much, they're so scared to make mistakes because that validation or that success is the only thing that's kind of giving them credibility.
Yeah.
Whereas, I'm always trying, me personally, I'm always trying to grow. I'm always, I have no problem sitting down with somebody like Ray and looking at how I've been teaching something. He says something, I break it down, we talk about it, and I go, all right, that's how I teach it now. Right? And I think the ability to decipher information and then being willing to communicate, regardless of ego, reputation, whatever. I think that's really kind of going to your, the people with their businesses. It's if you are just as good as you are right now, 10 years from now, I guarantee you will not be a successful
You will
business
fade
person.
out. That's right.
If you think you have it already set up, and then you go in the clock and be like, I'm just going to do this for the next 10 years, you're going to be out of business.
Oh yeah. I mean, honestly, in a year.
Yeah. No,
Maybe even 6 months. If you're not hungry to learn, and that I agree with you. I think that's true in every not just profession, but in every field, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Ray has more access to more information than anyone nowadays with the technology. Every pitch you can find spin rate, and it's how do you decipher all that information now? And like Jack said, there's old school, in school, than always just being in school learning, and we have more information than ever. And how to get the kids to decipher it. Not to say you don't want information, but how to retain and pick what you choose.
But also how to use like your knowledge and your experience on a level where these 8-year-olds, right? Because
It's how to create simple better. You know,
Yeah.
and you're just trying to get them. We have the knowledge. We're the experts in our field, and getting it so an 8-year-old, and that's where it just comes down to like different kind of skill acquisition. Whether it's different constraints, different gloves, different balls that come out of machines. Just there's different ways for the player to learn and kind of enhance that skill acquisition quicker.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Well, yeah, and it's funny because I think I've gotten in, the longer I've started coaching, the more I've started searching for more information.
Mm-hmm.
Like I wasn't a big clinic guy or convention guy. And, over the last 3 years, I've really done, I've been fortunate to go some of the other ones. I spoke last year at the, National High School Baseball Coaches Association, where, you're running into a bunch of 1,000-game winners at the high school level, right? And, you're only playing 20 games a season, win 1,000 games. That's
Wow.
a long time,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
To win a lot of those games. And, you start listening to things, right? And even in that room, I talked about one knee catching, right? Which Ray knows very well, has been a roller coaster of emotions in the baseball world. But it was funny because I was there, and the first thing I said was like, hey, listen, I know a lot of you have won 1,000 games with your catcher on 2 feet. I said, but at one point, before you won 1,000 games, you did something different, and you did something that everyone else probably thought was crazy. So just open your mind to seeing if this would work. And being able to go into that room of a bunch of Hall of Fame, there was like 8 guys that the school was probably named after them. We were in the field,
Yeah.
right? And being able to just go in there and talk to them. And a lot of those guys that are at that success level, they secretly, they have their notebook. They get to that level, though, they try to act like they're not taking notes.
Yeah.
But they are.
Yeah.
They're taking notes.
Because they still have the growth mindset, right?
And you have to have that. And I think because every kid is different and kids learn differently. And, that's why, I really enjoy these kind of events and, going to different states and talking at these things, because you don't know when you're going to learn something, and if you're always searching for knowledge, it just happens a lot easier, obviously. But that's,
I think it also, 2 things. I want to go back, don't let me forget, I want to go back to that, to the one knee. I'm curious what you were talking about there. And number 2, what I think you just said is when you have a growth mindset, I had my advanced spine professor in PT school. I remember him on the first day saying like my goal is to it was 3rd year, it was like an advanced course. And I remember him saying like, my goal is to have you leaving here more confused than when you came in. And to his point, the more you learn, the less you know. And I think the more you learn, the more you realize there's a humility that comes with it that allows you to be open to different ideas that will help you grow, right?
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say that article came out, Growth Mindset, 1976, and it pretty much holds true today, almost 50 years later. And
Yeah.
it's just like Jack said, sometimes we just keep going back to, sometimes we have some good answers before. And, the growth mindset is just, it's been proven over time just to be the best way, especially as a coach or whatever. Like Jack said, you can't be set in your ways, especially as baseball has changed as much as any game.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just asking better questions. It's like just challenging what you kind of think is the norm and what you can do to make the player better. It's just like I'll see stuff I see online, and I'm like, I don't know. Let me kind of
Try it.
stress test that, see what it is before I just poo-poo on it or just go, yep, that's what we're gonna do now. So it's just seeing if it passes the smell test, and then as much as the data and everything's changed the game, it's still whoever scores the most runs and stops them from scoring. So it's just creating the same structure, but maybe teaching them a little bit better because they're so well informed. There's so much information out there. It's how do we keep them on the right path?
And then back to your car analogy, though, there's always going to be the outlier, right? There's always going to be the athlete that all the data says do it this way, but you look at them and their pitching style or their catching style or whatever is so much better with the way they do it for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I've started conversations with both these guys with an Instagram clip going, what do you got?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, and it's like, you see something that you go, woo, that's different. Right. And it's like, let's deep dive, you know, and be like, what do you got? You know? And I think for me, like, I'll watch any video like that. I may not care for how some people are delivering the message, you know, because again, like, I think if you're sharing information, it should be inviting. It shouldn't be like ivory tower type stuff.
Amen.
You know, so
There's another way to get views.
yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of like people that'll throw out the message with the messenger, and it's just trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work, what makes sense, and kind of just keep shaping it as much as your core beliefs are always going to stay there. But you know, there's different ways you can say things, different people you can incorporate, and different things, because all three of us, we could try to play the same position, but our bodies are different and we move differently.
Travis can't.
Travis
I
can't.
see you play basketball, Jack.
Hey, I had to let him win. He was living with me.
That's it.
You were afraid he'd find his way upstairs, huh?
I sleep way too much to have an angry tenant in the house.
Oh my goodness. Tell me about this one Neil catching thing you were talking about. What am I missing?
It was just it was just a different way, a different problem solving method for a lot of people. And really what I think it did was it raised the floor of catching, maybe not the ceiling, but in the beginning. Now you have guys that are really, really good, but basically, you know, like, one of the reasons why we weren't getting like really good athletes at the younger levels to play catcher, it hurt. They didn't want to do it. Yeah, and they were tired.
Interesting. Yeah.
Tough position, puts a lot of stress on your legs, and then catchers usually, their offensive output usually drops because it's such a physically demanding sport that they've kind of just figured out going to a knee sort of takes some stress off the lower half and keeps you a little bit fresher, a little bit longer, but it also put guys in, they weren't ready to block as much, or they couldn't throw out of that position. So it just kind of made them go out and try to figure out how to create better solutions to throw, to block, to receive, because receiving, the metrics we had on receiving, stealing strikes, turning balls into strikes, and vice versa, like that outcome is
different
huge.
Yeah. Did they did you or have you found that those youth players who came out of that position had a hard time translating, like then relearning how to? Do they relearn? Do they eventually translate to a squad position?
He'd have to speak to it at the professional level. I think there's a lot of kids now who have been learning the new concepts almost as long, or if not longer, than some of the people that are in coaching positions. So I actually think the transaction or the transfer of knowledge was probably harder, because when you get to the elite level, like, the one thing I will say is, like, about 2 feet catching, like traditional, it's the most neutral position.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, it's not wrong.
Yeah.
And it's just so, like, anyone's like, oh, well, yeah, you can win games on 2 feet. You can win championships on 2 feet. But I just, like, again, like, what we've seen on the youth level building guys up is that it's allowed them to, A, play more games back there, B, simplify simplify what they're doing and allow them to be more focused on what's going on around. But Ray would be way better at explaining it at the professional level.
I think it's in our job title, catcher. Like, my first thing is set the foundation. Like, our job's to catch the baseball, whether you're on 2 feet because your body needs it, or, you know, one knee, then, you know, just be the best as you can and, like, set the foundation from that aspect. Just because there's guys that are different movers, there's guys that are super hyper mobile, there's guys that are really stiff. So we're just asking them to get put in positions that they may not feel comfortable in, and if they're not comfortable in the game, then
Their head's going to be somewhere else.
They're going to fail. And,
Yeah.
you know, and going back to the whole failure thing, we don't want them just to be good in a drill. We want them to be good in the game rather than, the goal isn't to be good in a drill.
And speaking of mindset, like, just subconscious mindset, if you're uncomfortable in a position, you're not going to be able to focus on the play at hand every time, right?
Yep.
I'm excited for Eric's talk today. I think that'll be good for everyone to hear, is because arm injuries are rampant at the youth level. Like Jack and Ray were saying, like it's not just one thing necessarily that's causing it. It's kind of like the environment kind of set for youth sports right now.
Can we talk about that a little bit?
We've got 2 full-time PTs. We've got countless amount of athletic trainers. We've got strength coaches. It's just, I mean, strength is like one of the biggest portions we have. Like we stopped, like once our season's done, usually it always turns into this like instructional camp.
Yeah.
And it's turned into a high performance camp. So it's very
great.
minimal baseball, and it's just more and more strength and PT.
So people are like already trying to get in here for the clinic. But beforehand, I just want to touch a little bit more on what you just mentioned. Like essentially, as physical therapists, we want to keep our athletes on the field. We're going to touch on a lot of this in the clinic today. But for those that can't make it in person today, first of all, catch it next year in person. But for now, just a little bit on like the injuries you guys are seeing a lot of, and how you're finding you're best able to manage them.
Yeah, I mean, at the high school, we see a lot of middle school to high school arm injuries. And again, the Northeast plays a factor. You're in cold weather. You need to ramp up quicker. We have a coach from Texas coming today, actually, and it's a totally different, thing down there with the amount of time they're allowed with the kids, the weather.
Yeah.
So, a lot is ramp up. Most arm injuries happen not necessarily because of fatigue, because they're ramped up too quick. Kids playing on multiple teams. Again, we talked about communication piece and advocating. Some kids don't advocate for their health.
Yeah.
They're put into tough spots by coaches, sometimes parents. And again, it's just an overuse thing. And like we talked about, a lot of kids are being sports specialized at an earlier age.
Yeah.
They might not necessarily learn the motor skills by playing 3 sports. So they don't move as well.
Yeah, it's hard. I find that's hard even as a parent. Like you want your kids to be able to keep up skill-wise and technique-wise with their peers, but everyone's fully aware of the overuse phenomenon.
Yeah.
I will say, like from our perspective as PTs, overuse, I think in the general population, overuse is a slightly misunderstood term. Like when I give talks on overuse, I often explain to my my listeners that overuse is more than just throwing too many, like ramping up too quickly or throwing too many pitches in one game. It's a response of not countering or using the corrective strategies, so that you get overuse of certain predisposed patterns when you don't correct those patterns, right? So there could be so many things responsible for the overuse, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the one thing too that like I do, and we actually talked about earlier, like I'm fortunate to have a great like PT connection down in Virginia, Angela Gordon.
Yeah, Angela.
But yeah, like I talk to her about stuff too, right? And she has 3 boys and they catch, and being able to talk about certain things, and she'll send me clients every once in a while, and then she'll give me what to watch out for.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing too. Like, don't be scared to be an expert in what you're an expert in.
Yes.
And then get help, And I think that's the other thing too, is like for people that are running, like don't be scared to reach out to the coach.
Yeah.
And talk to them, because we all like being included. Like there's nothing worse than sending a kid, right? Like let's say I have a kid who trains with me and then he plays for Travis. Hey man, why are you doing that? Jack told me to.
Right.
That's like the worst thing
Yeah.
a kid can tell a coach, because now it's Jack versus Travis.
Yeah.
We're like, hey, we're working on this. We're trying to do this, right? And either the response is good enough and communicates the answer, or be like, well, hey, you can call, Travis and I can talk, and then be like, hey, this is what's going on. Don't be scared to do that.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, and that goes back to everything we said earlier about just the importance of fundamental things like being humble and having a growth mindset and all of those leadership qualities we talked about earlier, because the best in everything are going to do that. And so, yes, as in our clinic here, we encourage, call the doctors, call the coaches, call the strength and conditioning coach they're working with, call the other, like we actually will co-treat with other PTs as well. And when you can be humble enough to say, look, this is what I see, just like you said,
Right.
You'll shoot these guys a text that says, what you got?
Right.
Because this is what I see, what do you see? And together, everyone's gonna perform better if we have that mindset.
Right.
that's why this clinic is so cool, really. And that's because that's what you're doing, is you're bridging all of those components. You have the PT, you have different coaches, you have different leaders in the baseball field, and so you're setting an environment where everybody can do that. It's really awesome. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming, guys. All right. So all of you, like I said, if you couldn't make it today, make sure you catch us same time of year. We're going to do this same time of year. So, but stay in tune. Follow, what's the Instagram for Philadelphia Baseball?
Philly Baseball Coaches Clinic.
Philly Baseball Coaches Clinic. Follow these guys as well. We'll put it all in the show notes, including, I think we'll put that growth mindset article in there because that is a good one. So click the show notes, hit subscribe, and follow these guys, and I'll see you next year.